Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. It's good to see Arlene up the back after her adventures over the last few weeks. And it's good to see some old friends return this morning as well on a trip from up north. So it's good to see you this morning, Laura. Brings back some good times from the YF of old. And looking at Laura and I now, it's really old. So, as you can see from the overhead, we're going to be taking a walk. In fact, for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be taking a walk up a couple of hills, or mountains if you like. We're going to take a walk through the hills of the Bible. And today we're going to be starting with Mount Horeb. We're going to be starting with Mount Horeb. Now, there's some significant places in the Bible, some real significant places. God didn't just use people. He used the places that they were in as well. He used the places that they were in too. And in these places, we're not just talking about geography. We're not talking about geography here. We will look at world-changing events that happened in these places. People's lives changed forever. Whole nations changed forever. So this week, we're going to be looking at Horeb. Next week, we'll look at Mount Moriah. But there are some fantastic places in the Bible that we can go to and to see what God used. See what God's used. There's Mount Carmel. There's a Mount of Transfiguration. And then we see Paul preaching on Mars Hill to the philosophers of their day in Greek culture. And of course, the greatest of all hills, the most important of all hills, was the hill that Jesus walked, Golgotha. Some fantastic places that we can look at in the Bible. And there's real meat to get our teeth into as well. Real meat to get our teeth into. And we'll see how God uses places and not just people. So as I said, we'll start our hill climb in Horeb, where not just one man's life was changed, but a whole nation's existence changed. A nation that was in turmoil and in slavery. Israel is the nation, Moses is the man that we'll look at this morning. Israel has been enslaved for 4 centuries, 400 years. Now, the story begins with Joseph way back in Genesis 37. And for those of us who do the Murray McShane reading plan, we have just finished the story of Joseph. We've just moved out of Genesis. So, way back in Genesis 37 is where it all starts. To cut a long story short, Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. Nice family. Nice family. He's the youngest of Jacob's sons. Jacob thinks, because of the lies that his other sons have told, he thinks that Joseph's dead. And he's distraught at this and mourns the loss of his son for a long, long time. But Joseph is not dead. But in fact, Joseph has been blessed by God. While in slavery, he comes into the house of Potiphar, who's an officer of Pharaoh. He's quite high up in amongst Pharaoh's people. And he excels under Potiphar. Potiphar, in fact, trusts him completely. Indeed, if you will, and excuse the analogy, Joseph becomes the Carson of his day. If you like, he's in Downton Abbey if you want. Excuse the analogy, but I think you get what I mean. He's trusted completely. But then in another incident, not of Joseph's making, he's put in prison. Now, without going even further deeper into the story, somehow he goes from prison to being Pharaoh's right-hand man. He becomes the Prime Minister of Egypt, no less. And this was a man who was sold into slavery by his brothers. He ends up being Pharaoh's right-hand man. He's basically running Egypt. He has become the Prime Minister of Egypt. And during his tenure as Prime Minister, as a famine hits the whole area. And by now, Joseph is 40 years of age. He hasn't seen his family in over 20 years. But thanks to the famine, Joseph becomes reunited with his family and his father as well. The whole family, 70 of them, then moved to Egypt because Joseph, being the Prime Minister, has put plans in place about this famine. So he's able to bring his family in and he's able to look after them and care for them. And it's from here the Jewish nation grows exponentially. Remember, these people are God's chosen people. Pharaoh dies and a new Pharaoh comes in and enslaves the Jewish people. And enslaves the Jewish people. 400 years pass of abject slavery, of brutality, and of absolute hate towards the Jews. They plead to God, and he hears them. It's now that we come to Moses. So before we go any further, if you have a Bible, please open it up at Exodus chapter 2. And we're going to read from verse 23 through to 3:12. So Exodus 2, verse 23, and we'll read through to 3:12. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And then God said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And God said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you. I have sent you. You have brought the people out of Egypt, and you will serve God on this mountain. And may the Lord bless the public reading of his word. Now Moses was born a Jew, but Pharaoh in Moses' time decided that all Jewish newborn males were to be killed at birth. See, he feared the Jews, and he wanted to keep them in manageable numbers. He saw them as a threat to the nation of Egypt. Now Moses' mother and father, they couldn't do this to their son. It's quite difficult to hide a newborn and keep a newborn quiet, is it not? So, when he was 3 months old, his mother placed him in a waterproof basket and placed him in the reed bed at the side of the river Nile. And he was discovered by none other than Pharaoh's daughter. She heard him crying. She took pity on the crying baby. She knew he was Jewish. Remember what I just said? All newborn males had to be killed, but yet she knew he was Jewish. But watching from a distance through all of this was Moses' sister. And when she saw that Pharaoh's daughter had picked her up and was looking to care for the child, she went up to her and spoke to her. And she said that she could find a Jewish woman to wet nurse the child, to look after the child for her. Basically, what had just happened was that Pharaoh's daughter had just adopted Moses. So who does Moses' sister go and find? She finds his mother, no less. Moses goes back to his mother, and she nurses him. But in effect, Moses becomes part of Pharaoh's house. He has a privileged upbringing, but he knows he's from Jewish stock. And then one day, when he was about 40 years of age, he decides to take a walk among his own people, the Jews. And during this walk, he sees an Egyptian beating on a Jew. Moses jumps in and kills the Egyptian, buries him in the sand. The following day, Moses is out taking another walk, And he sees two Jewish men fighting amongst themselves. And he says to them, what are you doing? Why are you fighting amongst yourselves? To which the response came, are you going to kill us too? Are you going to kill us too? Moses realises that if they know what happened, then the Egyptians know what happened. And he's spot on because Pharaoh finds out he is now a wanted man. And there's no way Pharaoh's going to stand back and watch a Jew kill a fellow Egyptian. He's out to get Moses. So Moses gets on his toes, gets off his mark, and he runs. And he runs. And he flees to Midian, which is a really good distance away. And it's where he was. And it's where the Egyptians were unlikely to chase him. It's too far away. It's where they were unlikely to chase him. So they weren't going to bring him back to justice. So as he gets to Midian, as I said, he's 40 now. He marries a local woman, Zipporah, who's the daughter of Jethro, the priest of Midian. And Moses becomes the shepherd of his flock. He now settles down for the next 40 years and gets on with life. So now we find ourselves in the passage today, Exodus 3. The Lord has heard Israel and his man is about to act. Although the title is about Horeb and the hope that comes from it, this is as much about God's calling. It's as much about God's calling. Not so much about one man's calling by God, but it's about the calling of all his people. Now, I know that was a fairly lengthy introduction, but you need to set the context in which we're going to be looking at this morning, where it all started and where we find ourselves today. So, we're going to be looking at three things this morning. We're going to look at presence, conversion, and apprenticeship. Presence, conversion, and apprenticeship. So, as we get into the passage, Moses is atop of Horeb, with his flock minding his own business. Minding his own business. And that area, Horeb, is also an area known as the wilderness of sin. You might think today that we're still in that wilderness. You might think today we're still in that wilderness. He's on top of a mountain. So the grazing must be really good to take his sheep up the side of a mountain and climb the mountain to get to that grazing. Not only that, he stands with his flock on the mountain of God. Did Moses know this? I suspect not. And then all of a sudden, he sees something very strange. And I'm sure quite puzzling. What he sees, at its least, is certainly unusual. So tell me, how often have you seen something on fire and it doesn't burn? Hands up. How often have you seen something on fire and it doesn't burn? Think about something, anything on fire, and there's no damage, and I mean no damage. Moses is looking at a bush that's on fire and isn't burning. Now I can say with confidence, with all my experience of fire, that there's always been damage. Sometimes only slight, but on other occasions, great damage has been done. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, that is definitely an attention getter, is it not? And you're standing there and you're watching a bush on fire and it's no burning, that gets my attention. Absolutely. Now, if you think your attention levels are quite high, think again. They're about to be lifted another notch, or maybe even 5 or 6. The bush now speaks to him. So he's watching a bush that's on fire, but it's no burning, now it talks to him. That's an attention getter in my book. And the bush calls out his name, Moses, Moses. Now, most of you know me here, know me fairly well. I'm fairly certain my answer wouldn't have been, here I am. I'm fairly certain it wouldn't have been, here I am. Now, we know because the Bible tells us that it is God speaking to Moses through the bush. God tells him that he's on holy ground, remove his shoes. It's now that Moses finds out whose presence he really is in. Verse 6 tells us that. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses had his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Really striking, isn't it? But there's one more striking thing that's going on here. One more striking thing that goes on here. And that is that God speaks in the present tense here. Think about what God has just said. I am the God of your father. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob. He's speaking in the present tense. See, we would speak in the past tense here, wouldn't we? Because we know that Moses' father's dead. We know that Jacob's dead. We know that Isaac's dead. We know that Abraham's dead. Right? We would speak in the present tense. But not God. Oh no. Maybe their earthly bodies are done and are buried and they're finished. But you see, they're alive and they're very much alive with God in eternity, in heaven. So as far as God's concerned, we're in the present tense here. These men are still alive. But alive in the eternity. But what this also shows is, what it shows us here is God's divine constancy. God's divine constancy. He has come through the ages of man. He's come through the ages of man. And now he's telling Moses he will remain with him also. We've heard this mentioned once before. We've heard this type of stuff mentioned twice before in the Bible. Joshua 1 and 5 and Hebrews 13 and 5. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. God is saying God will always be. And God has always been and God will always be. That's what's been said here this morning. In his commentary. So there's God's presence. We've seen Moses and God's presence. In his commentary, Alec Mattia calls the first 10 verses Old Moses, New Moses. We are now about to see the moment of Moses' conversion. 2 Corinthians 5 says this, any man in Christ is a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. The principle remains for Moses here. He hasn't met Christ, but he is now in God. Any man in Christ is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. The principle stands here. The old Moses is about to take a walk out the door, and the new one is about to take a walk in the door. So the old is gone, and the new has come, and the new has come. Now, as we've already read, Moses was not quite the compliant convert, was he? He did show some reluctance. Verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Who am I? But what's really important here is this. And what's really important here is this. Like all true conversions, it would be radical and it would be life-changing. You can see from what we've read thus far, Moses was a wee bit slow off the mark when it came to coming out of the dark and coming in to the light. He was. He questioned it. He questioned it. Carrying on Alec Mattia's quotes here, Mattia says that this slowness may also be a mark of a deep and lasting change of heart. Let me read to you John chapter 1, verse 12 to 13. Verse 12 to 13. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. When that eternal and irreversible change has happened to us, we become children of God. Moses is now a child of God. He's reorientated. His eyes opened, his spirit woke up. He's gone from darkness to light. And all this has happened because he's been confronted by the holy and loving God. Confronted by the holy and loving God. Now, the way God has spoken to Moses and by the means by which he has done this is also a sign of God's mercy. Burning bush speaks to Moses. How is that a sign of God's mercy? How is that a sign of God's mercy? Simply this. If God had come directly to Moses, God's sheer presence alone would have consumed Moses. Remember what he said in verse 6? He had to turn away. He couldn't look at God. He was afraid to look at God. God is righteous. He cannot take sin before him. So God showed mercy to Moses by talking to him through the bush. There is definitely one other time when God showed his mercy towards us. That's when he sent his son, Jesus, to come and save man. He came to us so that we could stand before God unblemished, clean of sin. This was God at his truly most merciful, is it not? That he gave up his son for us. That's true mercy. Do you get how merciful God is towards us? Do you get it? Let me read a verse from Psalm 24. Poses a real question. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? Can I tell you? I know the answer to that, and the answer to that is you. You can ascend the hill of the Lord. You can stand in the holy place. But how? How do you ascend that hill? Well, for the Jews, they had to do that through a sacrificial system. Once a year, the nation of Israel had to go to the temple, and a perfect lamb would be sacrificed on the Day of Atonement, where the sins of the nation would be brought before God, and it would be atoned for through that perfect sacrifice of a lamb. But we don't have to do that anymore, because God provided his son, Jesus Christ, as the perfect lamb, as the perfect lamb for our sins to be taken away. He gave us Jesus. He is the way for us today. God wants us to be in his presence, and through Jesus we can. It's wonderful to know that we can stand before the Almighty Creator, the maker of heaven and earth, unsullied, nor a mark upon us. The burning bush was for Moses to see that God is living and active. Moses had the burning bush. For us today, we have Jesus. We have Jesus. Jesus is God's mercy to us. Jesus is God's mercy to us. No longer do we need to cower as sinners before a holy and righteous God. Christ has opened up the way for us to God. What is it he says? I am the way, the truth, and the life. So far this morning, we have seen presence, conversion, and now we'll see apprenticeship. And now we will see apprenticeship. Now, I'm fairly certain we all know what an apprenticeship is. The taking on of a young man or woman to learn from a time-served and skilled tradesman. All the years a tradesman has spent honing his skill, perfecting it, now being passed on to a new recruit. Most apprenticeships will take 4 to 7 years. Indeed, if any man's been called into the ministry, a priest or a minister, will generally take 7 years to become qualified. Most of you know I'm a football referee. A Category 1 referee in Scotland who referees at the top level in Scottish football takes a minimum 7 years, even up to 10 years to get to the top level. To get to the top level of Cat 1. And then we have Moses, whom God has called to lead the nation of Israel out of their bondage in Egypt. His apprenticeship, 40 years. 40 years. Wow. Now, not for one moment I'm suggesting that Moses was a slow learner, but 40 years. It does beg the question, why did it take so long? Why did it take so long? Moses has spent from the age of 40 to the age of 80 before he became time served. Allow me to quote Motir again. God is not in our kind of a hurry. God is not in our kind of a hurry. God is not a ditherer. And we know this because the Bible tells us that. If we turn to the book of Habakkuk, if you've never got into the book of Habakkuk, can I just encourage you? It's a fantastic little book. It's only 3 chapters, but what a read. It is phenomenal what goes on in those 3 short chapters. And in Habakkuk, we see God act just at the right time. Habakkuk is in the midst of questioning God and how God goes about his business. Habakkuk in chapter 1 accuses God being idle. He's accusing God being lazy. Laissez-faire, maybe no. You know, that's what he's accusing God of. You're going to bother God. You're going to be, can you be bothered even looking at your people? Habakkuk, he's just absolutely tearing his hair out. Are you just going to stand back, God? Are you not going to intervene? It looks to Habakkuk that God is not bothered, but nothing could be further from the truth. I once heard someone say to me, God might be slow, but he's sure. Nonsense. God's never slow. He's always sure, but he's never slow. He's never slow. Let me read to you Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 3. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. God will act just at the right moment. Never early, never late, just at that perfect time. Just at that perfect time. And none more so than with Moses. For 40 years, Moses has walked the wilderness as a shepherd. He needed to go through that apprenticeship. He needed to learn how to look after someone else's sheep. He didn't know it. But Moses thought he was looking after his father-in-law's sheep. But in reality, he was in God's employ. Moses needed to learn to be faithful, not just with the big things, but also the small things. He needed to learn to be faithful with the humdrum of life. Take the parable in Luke 19, verse 17, the parable of 10 minas. Let me quote this to you, verse 17 to you. And he said to him, well done, good servant, because you have been faithful in very little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. And we see similar in Luke 16 as well. If we can't get the small stuff right, how are we going to get the big stuff right? Look what happened when Moses was ready. Do you think our elders here in Westwoodhill just walked into being elders, under shepherds of God's flock? Do you? Do you think they just walked into that job? Of course they didn't. It took many years of studying His Word in their Bible, dealing with situations that they may not realise that God had put them in to deal with. You see what I'm saying here, don't you? Now they lead a vibrant church, a hard-working church, ready to go where God leads. This didn't happen overnight. What our elders do now didn't happen overnight. They too went through their apprenticeship. They had to. It begs the question of the rest of us. Are we ready to go through God's apprenticeship in our lives? Are we? Are we ready to go through that apprenticeship? So this morning, we've seen conversion. That moment when Moses was called to God by God Himself. If you're here this morning and you're a Christian, you remember that moment when God confronted you? 5th of June 1991, about 8 o'clock at night. I remember it well. It's something I'll never ever forget. When God tapped my shoulder. I'm here, Paul. I'm here. You remember that moment, don't you, when God confronted you? That radical, life-changing moment where you turned 180 degrees. When you turned 180 degrees. And at that moment to be in the presence of God. And then to be put in the ultimate teacher's hands. To be taught and be guided by God Himself. To have direction and purpose in your life. Not the direction the world offers, which is a downward direction. See, God's is an upward direction. He takes you from the guttermost and lifts you to the uttermost. That's what God does. From the guttermost to the uttermost. Moses must have thought he was going nowhere fast, stuck in the wilderness with a flock of sheep, and then God moves in and boom. For Christians here this morning, we should be able to relate to all of those three things in our lives. What if you're here this morning and you've not committed yourself to Christ? What if you've not committed yourself to Christ? Where does God's presence, God's conversion and apprenticeship fit in your life? Horeb not only brought hope back into the life of Moses and Israel, but you too can stand in Mount Horeb today. And if you choose to take that walk up Mount Horeb, there's something that awaits you. There's something that awaits you. And you'll find that something in the Psalms again. It was written by King David. And it's Psalm 23. It's a famous psalm. The Lord's my shepherd. Let me read it to you. Let me read it to you. With this we'll finish. This is what's on offer this morning, if you take this walk up Horeb this morning, Lord is my shepherd. That's relationship. I shall not want. That's supply. He makes me lie down in green pastures. That's rest, true rest. He restores my soul. That's healing. He leads me in paths of righteousness. That's guidance. For his name's sake, that's purpose. He as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's testing. And there are tests. I will fear no evil. That's protection. For thou art with me. That's faithfulness. And we've spoke about that already. Hebrews 13:5. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Oh, the world will dump you when you're not working for it. But when life's going bad for you, God will not just dump you and move on. He will stay with you. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. That's discipline. What kind of a loving father wouldn't try to keep his children on the right path? Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Oh, that's hope. And that's hope. Thou anointest my head with oil. That's consecration. My cup runneth over. That's abundance. And I'm not talking about pots of money here. I'm talking about life and life to the full. Not possessions that the world throws at you, but life and life to the full. To be the person you ought to be, that God made you to be. My cup runneth over. As I've said, that's abundance. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. That's blessing. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord. That's security. And finally, forever. That's eternity. That's what awaits you if you're willing to walk up Horeb. Will you take the climb this morning? Will you take the climb? Amen. The band's going to come back and lead us in another hymn, and we'll stand to sing. And if you could remain standing for the final benediction. Thank you.